Alright, everybody, it's been a while, but we have another Game of the Month video lined up for today's episode. Once again, joining me is Tomo Moriwaki as we're going to be discussing Against the Storm and kind of like roguelike city building. And this is a very interesting topic, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. But I think it makes sense. And I think there's a lot of reasons that are sort of specific to the city builder. I mean, I guess any genre could probably find some use in the roguelike shape or structure to kind of cushion some of the things that are a little tricky about the genre.
hmm And this is the only one that we've seen kind of like inklings of this idea of having like roguelike or very like I guess like run focus or challenging city building over the past decade. There are the likes of like Banished, Frostpunk. There's been like this whole kind of wave of like survival city builders. And I'm curious, like before we get to Against the Storm, like what do you think of like the whole like kind of like survival theme of a city builder?
Well, I'm sure it was imagined or that the product was sort of the idea for the product kind of came up because of the sort of ubiquitous nature of survival games that are out there. But I think the better question is why are there so many survival games out there? And I think that by sort of approaching the roguelike or basically just that there's challenge to the run and it's difficult and it comes to an end. I think what that does to something like a strategy genre like city building is it takes away a lot of that extra time you spend in a map because you can't really stop yourself even though you've completely won. And so you're just going to get all your buildings to the highest level. You're just going to like cap out all your storage and you're sort of just playing the game in its easy mode. And the game doesn't have a great way to message to you that maybe you should stop and maybe you should do something else. And I mean, we go back far enough and this structure basically city builder just goes forever. And in a way, you sort of totally forget what the beginning of the game is like. You don't really build like an awesome mastery of the rules set. Really, it sort of just becomes your town that for how that ended up however it ended up because of the way you played it that you kind of have an attachment to. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think I can't remember, but I feel like I've seen a game where there was like the home city that you keep, and then there were like levels. Oh, actually, I am thinking of Age of Empires Online. Um, and which I found to be a fascinating game, a kind of an enjoyable remix of the Age of Empires mechanics, and sort of exploring some of the ideas that I think have matured in sort of today's marketplace. I think Frostpunk is like a great sort of like inspired early product in there, and in a lot of ways felt more like it was just trying to improve the city building. It's like in SimCity, Godzilla will come and that there was a good reason for it, right? And no one calls SimCity a survival city building. Um, but now in today's world, we have so many survival games, and we understand that the drive and motive for that kind of gameplay. I mean, freaking, I did play a lot of Don't Starve together. It's a good jam. What's another one that comes to mind? Project Zomboid is another great example. Just these great games that you play over and over again, and you're the fact that you redo the beginning is actually something that makes you enjoy the game more because there's nuance to the beginning. I think earlier city building games had to strip away the complexity of the early parts of builds and thereby sort of like stunting the total complexity of city builders. Because I don't know if you felt this, but towards the end of city builder experiences for me, like all the settlers of Catan or whatever, not Catan, settlers, it's just called settlers. That once you kind of get deep into it, and like the Anno games kind of come to mind as well, you sort of mastered it. It's sort of a chore to start over. Um, the things that they had to do so that you could tolerate the beginning of the game made it so once you were deep in the game, it kind of added force to you leaving the game. And I think that certainly Against the Storm, that is not at all a problem for them.
hmm Just a lot of good points you just said there, Tom. I'm trying to think like how I want to springboard off of them. But Yeah, like to the point about survival style games, we have to do a discussion on Pal World at some point. I think that's gotta be like the next one on the list. We need to get the crew together for that. But like the appeal of like the kind of like survival style is again like very like antithetical to what we kind of look at like traditional city building. And when I say traditional city building, I'm thinking again of stuff like the Impressions era, SimCity, like to your point, a lot of the city builders that have become like kind of like some of the more cherished ones, they do have that issue where the city just at some point it just stops being like a game. It just feels like I think I used this example a long time ago, like how like someone sets up like a train, like model trains in their basement where you're no longer touching it. Like it's no longer about building it, it's no longer about manipulating. You're just sitting there watching the trains go around. And there is certainly appeal in that. Like the whole city skylines would be a really good example of it. But it kind of loses that aspect of I guess like challenge or interest. And like Anno is a really good example of this. I remember talking with Chris Beatrice about this a long time ago. Now he didn't really view the Anno games as being like pure city building, so they don't really simulate anything. It is very much I put this building down, it will do the same exact thing, the same exact way every single time. There's no deviation from that. And it does end up being like I think what you just said about how a lot of these games just the beginnings just feel very repetitive. It just really hurts these games. I know when I'm playing SimCity exactly what I need to do to start. Same thing with an Anno, same thing with Settlers. And it's a very tough line to walk. When we get into more about Against the Storm, we go to more of the survival side. It is also very hard to make that beginning feel interesting. It feels like there's a way to do things differently. And with the likes of like Frostpunk, I just remember another one, Timberborn, that is in early access right now. I think those games, like when we go to like the extreme end of kind of survival or roguelike city building, it has, I think, a similar problem in that, hey, did you not construct enough fur coats before wintertime and banish? Well, game over. Like, if you don't do X, Y, and Z within the first 10 to 15 minutes, you're done. Case closed, your city is dead.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it is actually something like in Against the Storm, things can go terribly wrong, but that doesn't mean it's over, right? There's always sort of, well, not always, but often room for recovery, even if like half a dozen villagers die and half a dozen leave or something, which feels bad when it's happening, but then when you recover it, it's kind of awesome.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to kind of like piggyback what I was just saying there, regarding like Frostpunk, I'm really curious like what you thought of it, and for anyone watching this recorded right now, I'm also interested like what did you eventually end up thinking about with Frostpunk? Because as many of us know, there is a sequel. I think it's like due out any time now, and like for me personally, I love the concept of Frostpunk, but I found it like just too, I guess, like puzzly to like really get into it.
Yeah, I think maybe they just pushed it a tiny bit too far for when it came out in our history. I feel like if it came out now, I think less people would find it too much. Because I think part of this whole, I don't know if people are thinking this when they're designing the game, but part of this repetitive beginnings, sort of once you master the arrangement of cities, there's nothing else to think about. Um, and you were talking about the model train analogy, like different people like to spend more amount of time sort of reveling in the achievement that they were able to do with building it all or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And you're right that the classic city builder in historically, that was sort of the feel good kind of game before there was like cozy games and before everything, before an entire genre of niceness sort of appeared. That's where you had to be, right? You had to play those games, and those games to serve their
Mhm.
audience then also kind of was a little repelled by harshness and too much challenge and certainly too much complexity at the beginning, right? It loved its complex. Those games love their complexity towards the end game, where there's lots of mathematical interactions between buildings and resources. Um, but they definitely can't do that at the beginning because so many players uh, aren't hardcore isn't the right way of putting it, but have a certain expectation at least. And so like I think that there are some hard aspects of Frostpunk that if you're not if you're not on board for that, it can hurt the overall experience.
Hmm. And I think one of like the more interesting aspects we get to this kind of like survival and roguelike city building is that they oftentimes have more interesting goals to them rather than again when we look at kind of classic traditional city building is just play until the sun dies. That's pretty much your only goal. Like, it's one of the things that stops me from getting into the Annos, or more specifically Anno 1800. It's been in my playlist for now like 4 or 5 years. They've had like 5 years of DLC. I think I've only spent like 3 hours playing that entire game. And I love like kind of like the concept of Anno, but I think the fact that there's just nothing like that we can say is if you can get here, you win or you've accomplished. It was the thing that I really liked, and again, like this is like my super, I guess, like spicy take for our discussion. I loved Anno 2205. It is the most like non-Anno of all the games like in the series, and part of that was because they kind of built this as almost like an open world city build. Like there was an endpoint. You had a goal way, way up there. Then when you've achieved it, you can say, I am done. I have completed all my tasks. I can end this game. It is finished. And I know a lot of traditional Anno fans who hated 2205. And again, because it kind of goes completely in the different direction as all the other games in the series.
Yeah, but the guts are still very similar. I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's probably why it was upsetting for some of the like the more, I guess, I don't know, the fans of the series, because in a lot of ways, Anno is sort of the like frozen in time. It's the pinnacle of the city builder of yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, unless you're going to go the route of like City Skyline or something, right? And then that changes kind of what it's about. It becomes much more sort of simulation-y. Um, and so for that kind of game, like that audience has like they still need their premier product, I guess. And
Mm-hmm.
it's weird how just changing the story kind of is enough to make people upset. Because I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you could add that objective to any of the city builders, and it's what's interesting about that. Right. I think that if you have like a neutral perspective, there's no way that's a problem. That's always something interesting, right? To create that thing to aspire to and to be given positive feedback for accomplishing it. Like that should be a normal positive improvement to a title shape. Um, but I think in this case, it's like it starts to speak. It speaks against some of the weird things that the genre had to hold on to, right? My my city that's a save that I've been putting hours and hours and hours into once I had done the few things and accomplished certain stuff that I just enjoy having created that order. Kind of like to some extent, like Stardew Valley can be this, provided you don't, go into the rabbit hole and get turned into this like, logical, infinitely
Mm-hmm.
complex machinery kind of mentality. If you can stay away from that, then it also kind of fulfills that, right? That there's something sort of, it's like it feels like the developer is messaging to you that things might get mean, and that was not acceptable because you've been trusting the developer to never message any meanness.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and again, like as you were saying earlier about like how when these games are released and have such a huge impact on their successes or not. We don't have the time to get into it today, but like Dwarf Fortress is probably one of the big examples of this. Dwarf Fortress is like really like the quintessential kind of survival colony sim. It is a game that all the others have been judged by, and it is a very mean game from what I've heard. Like this is a game where, hey, you didn't do this one thing right, now the lava comes in, wipes out your guys, and it, like as we've said before, I know we brought this up during our discussion on difficulty that sometimes it's really about conveying to the player, hey, this game can, punch you in the face if you're not properly preparing for it. I know Darkest Dungeon, like the very first thing that pops up in both games is this is a hard game. You are expected to lose. Your characters will die.
Well, I mean, it's not just a hard game, right? It is almost like institutionalized disappointment. It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing.
So,
Actually, did Darkest Dungeon 2 do well?
I don't think it did as well as the first one.
Because you can't do as well as the first one, but
Mm-hmm. Let's
I
see.
just I didn't end up playing that game, and it feels like now the ocean just keeps getting bigger and bigger. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that game. It's like, oh shoot, that was like 7 years ago or something, or probably four, but whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so according to Steam Spy, Darkest Dungeon 1 sits at between 2 and 5 million owners. Darkest Dungeon 2 sits at 200 to 500,000. So
Still,
it.
fantastic success, but yeah, nothing like the first
Mm-hmm.
one. The first one was like a cultural phenomenon.
Oh, yes.
And I guess
And,
that was early in the streaming history too. So those streams where people like destroying their keyboards at the end when their party dies were that's a special moment in game history right there.
mm-hmm. Yep, and again, we could certainly talk about like firsts when it comes to the game industry. That's another major topic.
That sounds like a fun one.
Mm-hmm.
That has to be that has to be more like a round table though, because it's too
Mm-hmm.
much popcorn and enjoyment in the conversation, I think.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit more about Against the Storm and this idea of a roguelike city builder. So that's a very interesting point. There's another roguelike city builder that I played that came out like roughly around the same time. Actually, they're almost literally a year apart. And that was a Kinga Seeds of Civilization. This was kind of like it follows a similar MO, but the idea is it's not as I think focused on like the meta or on the randomness of buildings as Against the Storm did. And this concept that both games have done is what if instead of building a city over 80, 100, 200 hours of play, what if you build many cities? And each city takes you 30 minutes, an hour, maybe 2 hours, and we just keep adding more and more you can do for each subsequent city. And it's one of those ideas that it sounds so simple, but we really haven't like seen like anyone go like this far in terms of roguelike. We in the for like the first part we were talking about again games like Frostpunk, Banish, and so on. But they were still focused on kind of like a long term investment. Like you still had to play them for an hours and hours, and there was no real like persistence. You lose, a campaign in Frostpunk, you're not, starting over with bonus characters. You're not getting more tech. It's more of a puzzle in that respect. But
Oh, yeah, for sure.
but what makes Against the Storm so fascinating is that they kind of intertwine this idea of a roguelite into its city building. And that we really haven't seen before.
Yeah, and sort of like with a brush stroke across the face of it with survival as it's kind of as the threat, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's something that city builders have always struggled with, like who's the bad guy in a city builder? And it's usually nobody. I mean, it's time, right? You can have a poor configuration and wait too long, and you could get stuck, I guess. But um, it's pretty elegant by making the world the threat. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't obvious that it should work, but now I do. I see that rain as a threat. And then I see it as a threat to the morale of the regular people in my city.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I don't have any warriors of any type. I guess the lizard people seem slightly more aggressive, so somehow, but it might just be their teeth in their portrait image, and that they like meat. But yeah, it's interesting now that you feel you need to arrange your buildings. You need to figure out the pathways between them. You need to sort of manage all of the things conventionally that you might manage. I mean, the speed of villagers and them moving around the space and their pathing, and the time cost of that, I think is pretty. handled pretty in a pretty sophisticated way. But that's not to say other games haven't tried to handle it. I just think I don't know. Against Storm might do it better than any other city builder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lots of city builders care about the pathing, and but it ends up being more buggy than a feature, right? Where oh, I did things in such a way that people can't build this building or something, which doesn't seem to happen in Against the Storm. Whereas I'm very mindful of the speed at which people are gathering, the time and distance it takes to get to the
Mm-hmm.
warehouses. That flow becomes super important. I then look at when the next storm is going to happen, make some assessments about how things are going to be by then. You know, feel sad that I only have 30 seconds until the storm hits, and I don't have enough wood, and
Mm-hmm.
so I might lose a few villagers. Right, these thought processes are really well connected to the looming threat, which sort of subtle in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it took me at least 10 hours to like sort of palpably feel the storm as the threat.
Mm-hmm.
I conceptualized it, of course, but now it's like it's been drizzling for a while. I'm starting to get nervous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think again, like what kind of helps against the storm compared to some other games is that it's designed again about very short form cities. If you're still in one city 5, 10 hours in, something's gone very wrong. Whereas with a lot of the other games we've played, again, it's always about this kind of long form, like you're supposed to be stable. You are supposed to hit this point where once you've solved everything, your city just kind of runs on its own. Like you don't need to do anything. You figured it all out. I was trying out the game News Cycle, which was the one that Seth was talking about, and it's a very interesting take as well. But it still has that same kind of issue. Like a lot of these survival style games love to do the whole like season aspect. Okay, you're
Sure.
in summertime now. You're in fall, up winter, and you can no longer grow any farms or fish, and it doesn't feel, I guess it doesn't feel as like impactful as saying, hey, you're about to get this nightmarish storm and now your city's going to be in like this horrible state for like a minute, 2 minutes. Can you survive this? And if you can, well, you're in very big trouble.
Well, something else that's sort of interesting about Against the Storm is that it is tuned towards simplicity, right? A
Mm-hmm.
limited number of builders. I mean, large settlements can get big, and when it gets kind of big, it gets real complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like when you see crazy, like you don't have to play a lot of Factorio for it to get crazy, right? And so like the normal play of Against the Storm is sort of limited. It's a little more like you know um, Warcraft 3 versus StarCraft 2, if that makes any sense. Well, StarCraft 2 isn't a ton of buildings either. Maybe what's an RTS where you just start loading up on buildings, right? And things start get just these giant rows of things. I
Like
feel
a
like I've played
Supreme
games like this.
Commander, Planetary
Certainly
Annihilation.
those games get crazy, right? Where I'm like shift clicking like 19 power plants in a row once I've gotten certain things going. It's not a scale game, right? The scale
Mm-hmm.
is low, and it's how smart you are about arranging things. Um, and and it actually sort of breaks down once it gets big, because it's overwhelming trying to manage who, their morale, the pathing, the other timers that are taking like seven different things are consuming my resources, and do
Mm-hmm.
I have that all prioritized? Pretty much never. When I get there was the first time I sealed one of the seals. I was doing a lot of pausing and a lot of assessing everything and trying to get the numbers right. But generally speaking, I haven't had to do that at all. And I think I probably didn't have to do it then too. It's just that the stakes were feeling high, right? And those kind of progressive curses that were rolling in was starting to make me feel like I wasn't going to make it. And then I started pausing and assessing the whole state of things. And I had unlocked like seven, medium-sized glades, one big glade, and like nine small ones. And I just had shit everywhere. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm. And having like that kind of like escalation with the various glades is another very smart aspect that you can tell. Well, you can't tell how bad it's going to be until you open it up, but you're given some measure of it. And again, like this is just really good roguelike design. That the player is given some aspect of risk assessment and is forced to make that choice. Well, this is incredibly dangerous, but I may get all this really good stuff out of it. This is safer, but maybe there's nothing that I need in there. Do I want to take that chance? And it's like part like that like Hail Mary plays that we love so much.
Yeah, it is interesting how the beginning of the pipe all revolves around wood and chopping trees down. Chopping trees down is the wheels of the system. Um, oh, while you were saying that, it reminded me of um, oh, I forgot. Never mind. Continue.
And one thing that I really appreciate and love about Against the Storm that I would like more city builder or survival builds or whatever like really invest in is the idea of having kind of redundancy in its building types. The thing that always drives me a little crazy about a lot of the city builders is where you only have like one building. Like each building can only serve like one purpose. So it makes it very repetitive. If, the only food in this world is coconuts, then I'm just going to build coconut farms or coconut harvesters every which way. And then the ones that may have different food, it still just all kind of revolves around that same thing. You build a scavenger hut, gathering camp. The thing that works with Against the Storm is that you have the different buildings that they always do multiple roles, but they'll do them in different kind of
Efficiencies.
specialties. Yeah, proficiency. So it's like, okay, so this inn will do better in terms of baking bread. It can also make ale, but it's not as good as having this brewery over here that can do nothing but just brew ale. But it does it at like 3, 4 stars. So like one brew in the brewery is like worth like 5 or 6 in the inn. And this is where we get to like we'll have to talk a little bit about some of the complexity of Against the Storm in the next few minutes, but this is like a very interesting idea that we really don't see from a lot of other city builders.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really elegant idea, right? In that on the surface, it feels like at first you're a little overwhelmed. You're like, which building do I pick, right? And you're thinking probably one resource at a time at this point in your kind of progression with the game. So you just pick a building that makes what you want. Good for you. And you do it, and I think that worked for me too as well. But then as you continue to play, you start acquainting yourselves with maybe you get to that one and a half resources. It's like, oh, for example, I love the carpenter building because it's cheaper wood than whatever the name of the basic plank creation building is that also makes like the bricks and the cloth stuff. But it also makes tools. And obviously tools are sort of the essential path towards a fast reputation if you want to finish a round. You know, using tools and sending the materials back to home base, or I mean the main city, gets you some percent, some either a whole reputation point or between a half and a whole, and amber. Um, so if you have a good tool supply, that's actually probably one of the best ways to finish a level quickly. Which now, like finishing a level quickly, if you were having a good time building a city in a city builder, wasn't something that you worried about or something you
Mhm.
thought about. But now I can I can see that carpenter building for two of its strengths. You know, right now I need to make planks, and very shortly after I'm going to have to be make. I'd like to be making tools so that if I get in trouble, I can also rush my way out of a map. Right, I can get to the reputation cap and then close it down, even if like I have a bad setup that was starting to decline. Um, the more and more as you start seeing these buildings as the one and a half to the two to the three resources that you need, you start putting together ever more complex puzzles. And then now the real builds start to kind of emerge. You know, you start recognizing that, you know, if I get this building and then this building, then that opens me up, provided I'm on the right kind of map that generates blah 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 out of chopping down trees or whatever. That I now I have it now, but now I'll have it easy, right? And generally, you will, unless oh, there's no stone in the first three glades that I opened up, or whatever the story ends up being. Because there's about 1,000 different stories like that that all sort of relate to the way you strategized or predicted your resource availability versus the kinds of things that you could build.
Hmm. And having that kind of challenge of the fact that every map can have different deposit of resources or a different spread also forces the player into, again, this idea that you can't just build the same thing every single city and it's going to turn out right. And that's completely antithetical to what we were just saying earlier with Frostpunk, Banish, and so on, where you must have that kind, and even like going back to like Anno and the other city builders, where you must build X, Y, and Z as your foundation every single time, or you're screwed. Like, that's the whole point. Here, again, you have to say, well, if there's no farmable land, well, I probably shouldn't invest in farms. If it's all, berries and like those, like, kind of like the meat snails, wherever they are, then that's where I need to invest in. And you can kind of get around it to some extent based on like what starting resources you bring in, but it's still very much that case of you're dropped into this area. What do you have? Like, can you make lemons out of lemonade?
Well, yeah, and then I think that's where the game shows signs of really learning what the essence of the kind of survival roguelike is like.
Hmm.
This you win some, you lose some, and if you're at a disadvantage, you got to make do. And I think that creates such a more interesting relationship with the rules, right? It's not what is the optimal strategy. I ideally, I benefit from having the full knowledge. The more I fill my knowledge in about how all of the things relate to each other, the more prepared I am for when things don't happen the way I expect them to. And that keeps the learning curve sort of valid, right? I think in a lot of games, and maybe just a lot of games in general, that the dominant strategies are something that you strive towards, and once you
Hmm.
got there, you you forget to give a crap about learning the rules that maybe aren't as powerful, because there's no reason to, right? And in the case of Against the Storm, you always have a reason to know more about the way things work and the way things interact with each other. It's like I feel like I get like another 50 hours into the game, and I'll sit there and probably stare at whether getting the herbalist camp or the trapper camp is the right call, because there's kind of like an equal distribution of those kinds of resources on this type of map or whatever.
Hmm. And the fact that this game does it without combat is another very interesting point. Because a lot of the city builders to have some kind of conflict, or something again, as you're saying earlier, to have like the enemy of the
Yeah.
map is to have like an invading horde, to have an army coming in. And for a lot of people who play city builders, at least like for myself, like I typically like turn off like any kind of like military mode, RTS mode in a lot of city builders because that doesn't really like that's not the point of what I'm looking at as a form of conflict when I'm trying to build something in like an Anno game. And like
Well,
speaking of that, like the thing that I really love about Anno 2205 is that they did have conflict, but it made like its own like mini game or it's like subsystem that you kind of have to go and into a conflict zone and fight rather than okay, I'm busy building my city. Here come the helicopters to destroy, half my settlement. And it's very hard, I think, to get like we said, it's very hard to make conflict both rewarding and make it something that is like interesting to the player rather than like to go back to the like Godzilla example from SimCity, like or like if you play Super Nintendo, it was Bowser. It's like okay, Godzilla smashing my city down. Okay, I guess I just put all my buildings back.
wait, are you saying early SimCities on Nintendo had Bowser instead of
I'm
Godzilla?
pretty sure like the Super Nintendo of SimCity 2000 had
Oh my
Bowser
god,
as.
that's amazing! I didn't know that. Cool. No, yeah, I think it's funny though because one way to look at it is the difficult to give a phase two threat of the storm in Against the Storm is exactly that fighting. They just gave it camouflage, right?
Hmm.
It's that and the way you fight though is to change the resources that you care about and to prepare the prepare by making sure everyone can be fed, better if it's better food. Make sure if you have those taverns or those monasteries in place to fulfill those higher needs for your people, then they can weather the storm. Which is not terribly different than like upgrading armor and building weapons with your resources instead. Um, it's very clever. It's like every couple days that go by, it's like I appreciate the enemy that is the storm more and more.
Hmm. And being able to have like the different resources that come in, have these different options and the different rewards that can pop up during a city, also provide the
By the way,
player.
the rainwater is a sort of stealthy benefit of the storminess.
Hmm. Can
I
build
don't
the
usually
rain
pay enough
collectors.
attention. Well, and then you get different rain when it's during storm phase. So there's something you can get there that you can't otherwise get, which means you can't do it until the storm happens. But to prepare for the next storm, anything that uses storm water can get mobilized. It lots and lots of clever little loops all over the place, really.
Hmm. And speaking about clever loops, I think this is a good point to bring up, like kind of like the persistence of the game, because this is another thing that we really have not seen at like this particular level in any other game. That you have this kind of world map, and the whole idea is that you go out, you build a city, and then like all like the neighboring tiles kind of count as resources. So you're getting different bread, and then the bread can be used to upgrade and unlock new structures and new features. But you can't just build in the same spot every single time because those resources are being consumed. And like having this kind of like meta layer to a city builder is very like unheard of. Like if I go back to something like with Kinga, like it had something similar, but not like the same level of this is the entire world, you know, build around it.
Yeah, yeah. I think you can probably safely say that it's the first game where way more than most of the functionality is unavailable
Mm-hmm.
until you've done the loop many, 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 many times. And I'm probably only like I think I might be level 9. Um and I don't have all the upgrades yet and there's clearly many more upgrades above it. So, like I'm expecting that my early game will be super powered, after another 50 hours of gameplay, but that I'll be spending a lot of time, puzzling and calculating over and how to get the mid to late game stuff going for that next difficult thing that I want to overcome. And it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting when I say that, I think I recognize that the game still has in some ways, all the same flaws as any city builder, but all their mitigating strategies pushed the end problem way down the number of hours gate, and then it allowed them to have way more complexity in their systems early and in the middle and the end. So there's not a weird awkwardness, right? And then since I'm playing the beginning over and over and over again, it actually benefits them for there to be lots of options at the beginning, right? That
Mm-hmm.
the puzzle at the beginning still be valid. And I'm probably still at a place where I still enjoy that initial puzzle. Although I wouldn't be surprised if, like, when those next 50 hours are over, that I'm done with the beginning finally. But it is unprecedented, right? That city builders early game, you didn't get tired of it or feel that it was too repetitive until like 100 hours of gameplay, right? That's usually you get done with beginning game and you're just never there again.
Yep, and that, again, like that's a really good point about what kind of separates Against the Storm is that you're going to be doing the early game. You're going to be doing it with literally every single city, and so they have to make that part very engaging. Because again, like we look at like any other building logistics style game, when you're building up, you're not supposed to go, okay, well, I just spent 30 hours building a colony in Factorio. Let me go back to using the hand drill again for another
Exactly.
hour. No, it's here's my electrical power drills and automation, and we're just kind of going from one colony to the next.
Well, I mean, don't you feel like you specifically actually try to tech up
Yep,
so that you never have to worry about things again, right? To keep what you're considering simple enough, you're moving up the chain and you really want to abandon and throw away as close to forever as possible, right? The things that were behind you.
yep,
Whereas in
that's
this case, those beginning things still matter sometimes in late game.
yep.
I mean, obviously wood matters the whole way through. And actually every farm I put up early in any map on Against the Storm ends up becoming a big earner for me.
Yep. And yeah, like what you just said there, that's the whole impetus to playing logistics games. Yes, picked up this ore by my own hand. I never want to do that ever again. I want to set the automatic conveyor belt to launch it over here, to send it down here, and then, I never think about harvesting ore for the next 100 hours of my planet.
Even Minecraft is kind of like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it kind of goes back to what we were saying that part of that reason is at the beginning for a lot of games is so simplistic. It's required, but it's so simple that you're kind of again just going through that motion of I'm going to punch this tree, I'm going to chop this block of coal. I'm going to just do this, and like there are people who really like that. They like this idea that okay, you go from bronze to silver, from silver to gold, gold to diamonds. And it just again like kind of wears on me. I think it's part of the reasons why I just don't get into like a lot of like the survival style games. Like again, like we're not talking about Power World because I have a lot to say about that one, but the reason why I like Power World so much was I could get a base going within 30 minutes. Like I could get, I don't have to worry about chopping wood anymore. I have my little pals chopping the tree down. Whereas if I play a game like Enshrouded or Rust, I'm going to be chopping trees probably for the next 5 to 10 hours of my play, and I better enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. And in Rust, you're gonna be betrayed so badly, and you'll be just left with all this negative emotion.
Mm-hmm. So with Against a Storm, like there are I think a few valid criticisms I have about it. Does like as we've seen, like the beginning of this game is very is far more advanced than I think any other of its kind. And it does feel a little bit hard. I think it kind of lacks that approachability that we see from a lot of roguelike and roguelite style games. And again, like it's definitely not fair to compare it to a game like Hades. But one of the things that made Hades work so well was that it was very approachable in terms
Yeah.
of yes, you're going to die, but we're going to give you all this fun lore. And here's, your upgrade tree, and here's, the next carrot on the stick that can happen 5 runs from now. In with Against the Storm, like part of the things that can make it very confusing is that there's a lot of little details that if you don't remember or if you don't notice, it will come back to haunt you. And again, this gets at what we were talking about with having the redundancy of the buildings. If you didn't set, this kitchen to use the right source of meat or the right source of food, then you're wondering, well, why are all my colonists starving to death when I have 80,000 vegetables and meat stored in my warehouse?
Yeah, no, I think that it is maybe, I don't know all their sort of marketing vibe necessarily, but the game is definitely a hard game, or a game that you should expect to fail at the beginning
Mm-hmm.
as you kind of learn the ropes of the basics, and that is not everybody's cup of tea. People don't like walking into a room getting punched in the face a few times as a starting point. Although maybe it is maybe sort of fundamentally well, no, it is a complex game. I think that they chose to take advantage of the repeat play and make it more complicated. Which means I probably agree with them deep in my soul somewhere, but it's true how that can turn away users.
Mm-hmm. And like as we were talking about like on our Discord, we were mentioning the Norp analog as like an idle game, and one of the things that that game did really well is that it's kind of like almost like the reverse Against the Storm. Where Against the Storm adds a lot of complexity, it throws a lot at you, which is appealing to the genre. Norp Analog basically says, do you like an idle game? Do you not want to spend the next 8 months grinding for persistence and respecking and going back and prestiging? Well, here's an idle game that you can play and maybe finish within a week, maybe 10 to 20 days. And it's again like this idea where trying to like get, and we've said this before about trying to find like, that part of our lizard brain that is appealing to a genre and focusing entirely on that can be such a really great aspect for a game. And with something like Against the Storm, as we've said, what it does is basically say, we're going to make a city builder where you are going to enjoy restarting every single city every single time, because we're going to make it feel different. And again, that is something that we don't see in like an Anno, Skylines, Impressions, and so on, and even logistics games. I would love to see more logistics games that really just like throw this idea that there's not just one perfect line that you're going to do for progression. Do you want to invest in electrical electrical lines for this one? Do you want to focus on coal, nuclear power? Kind of like getting at the whole appeal of like the SimCity franchise, but making it actually like a part of the gameplay loop, like making it an actual decision beyond just saying, well, this time I'm just going to focus on farms just because farms.
Yeah, no, it's I feel like it's really interesting how well, okay, there are some games out there where the first weapon you get is still useful at the end of the game because it has its power curve and that use stays valid, right? Um, but I think that so many of us under so many situations developing games just sort of take the default approach to progression. And when we do that, we build the early stuff with the intent for it not to be used, right? That actually what we're doing is that we're just creating a set of stairs that lead to the game that we really want people to play. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but that does constrain the shape of the product at that point, right? It means that replaying the early parts of those things is rarely going to be awesome, and that the true game is sort of in this later game experience, and that without the later game experience you don't get access to a lot of the thoughts that I thought were awesome, right? And I do think that in a more sophisticated fashion, that Against the Storm actually says that beginning game, middle game, and end game, they they each one takes and requires the use of the step before it. You're not gonna change, you're not gonna abandon all of the pieces that got you there. In fact, the way you arrange the pieces that got you there will sort of determine how easy life is or how smooth things can go when you get there.
Mm-hmm.
A carefully set up town, which isn't always possible because sometimes what you find doesn't make sense, and sometimes you
Mm-hmm.
find yourself in this big hostility debt and everybody's angry. But when your planning works, right, you can find yourself at the end of a session in Against the Storm, and you're like, you just killed it. Oh, I do have one criticism.
Mm-hmm.
The the marketplace or the trade routes are a little overpowered, right? If you focus on spitting out those little red baggies, what are those called? Well, the goods
Yeah.
package. um, that it you can be if you're going to be sloppy, you should probably be sloppy in the generation of those red baggies because it'll accommodate extra use of the trade routes, which as you level them up generate even more money. And if you have enough amber, or you get to like middle late, or you get firmly past the middle part of the progression scheme, and you have tons of amber, there is no that is it is it's going to be easy.
Mm-hmm.
But a few missteps or a few hiccups or a few unexpected things early in that process can definitely set you on a path where you can't rely on that trad route. But if anything is overpowered, if anything is repetitive, it's make sure that works. And I know that there's at least one building that denies bandits. Like the presence of a bandit camp blocks the both the trader and trade routes, and that changes. I had gotten pretty reliant on that, and I felt like things were starting to get a, that part of it, the trade part of it, started to get repetitive, and I started to feel comfortable and strong because of it. And then that one map hit with the bandit camp, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm terrified.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and like we said, like, it's always hard to know like should they make the trading less useful, or do they leave this in as a kind of like again like that solution that if you need it or if you want to use it, it's always there and available for you.
It's interesting. If I had to guess, I feel like the way in which the traders and the trade routes were implemented, and its like sort of its power curve over the course of a session, it's definitely sort of a bad RNG mitigator, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I bet I would guess that a lot of players that are kind of in their 20th hour and are starting to get comfortable and feel like they understand how things work are all relying on that. They use that because they know things can go wrong in the sort of randomly what you can get access to.
Yeah,
Being
and
able to buy some tools like after the second glade and sacrificing, maybe, you sacrifice your gears because you can't build, so you won't be able to build more buildings, but you hope you can find more later. You get to that second glade and you can start like pumping out some of those send back to base things, and you get a bunch of amber, and then the next trader hits and now you can buy up all the food you want. Like that happens to me quite a bit.
mm-hmm. And to go back to your point a few minutes ago about like games that let you use the same one from beginning to middle to end, I would love to hear your thoughts on the series Ast Libra that I've been enjoying. It's an action RPG that their whole thing is just you want progression, we're giving you progression. Like here's like 50 different swords that you can buy and then you can upgrade and you get more skills and it's just basically like a Disgaea meets action RP, a 2D action game almost. It's one of those games you either play for 30 minutes or you play for the next 60 to 80 hours. Like there's no like in between for it.
20,000 reviews and overwhelmingly positive.
Yep.
Plus
It was a
8%.
sole developer work over like 13, 14 years to make that one. Using like the
Wow.
best possible use of like placeholder art and free music, and they put it all together. And
I'll have to check that out.
and like with Against the Storm, also as a quick time check, we are about like 53 minutes in. It's about like a little bit before 6:10. Um, I think maybe another 10 to 15 minutes if that works for you.
That works for me. Yeah, it's
Okay.
perfect.
So with Against the Storm, I guess like in terms of like what we can take away from it. I think that's a very interesting point about because again, there's a few other in like this kind of like roguelike city building. I know I was looking this up because I was trying to remember the name of it. There was, excuse me, Dream Engine's Nomad Cities that's been in early access for a few years now. They are planning on releasing, I think, sometime in 2024. And I guess like with this idea of having like a run or this like meta layer, what did you think about the meta layer for Against the Storm?
Well, I guess you could. They have two layers basically, right? One is there's meta layer one, which is you get a certain number of attempts to strike out into the darkness, right?
Mm-hmm.
The kind of world map exploration part, right? And you can kind of you even see those concentric lines to kind of, I mean, they mean multiple things, but they at first they give you this idea that there are stages and that you're not expected to get the further you get out every time before it collapses back in is sort of some evidence of progress. And then those question marks, there's I'm sure I haven't unveiled them all the types of them, and so I'm always interested in finding those. And then that requires me to, you know, consume time efficiently and get as many towns as I can to kind of strike out. And then, of course, there's the upgrade tree, which is really long. There's lots and lots of upgrades, lots of reasons to use, baked bread, I guess, seems to be the currency for whatever reason. Um, and I have a strong suspicion because as I said, I'm probably only like, I feel like I'm only like 25% through that progression, that upgrade progression. But I think that that's gonna keep me going for a very long time just because of that. And then I don't even fully understand the ramifications of how far I can go in that world map yet, right? I've only unlocked bronze seals or sealed bronze seals or whatever the language is, and and had like at most like five town runs before everything collapses, and that is now starting to create a very interesting loop, right? It's not just one run. There is I have my town and I have to solve for it and I have to get a certain amount of reputation or I fail if the queen gets impatient. That's sort of the essential session of the game, right? But that very quickly the real run or the playthrough of that is how far out can you get before the, I don't know, is it like a superstorm that causes everything, the
Mhm.
oh the corruption, the blight
Something like
rot or the
yeah.
blight stuff, right?
Hmm.
So that actually is super interesting for me, and I'm like, I can't wait till my runs get deeper and deeper into it, and that's also kind of making me a little bit worried because I'm like, what happens when that run is like 9 or 10 sessions? And then
Hmm.
what happens when I start packing them multiple rounds together in a single sitting, which I haven't done yet, but I can sort of feel it, and then I'll feel like so much mastery over the early and mid games, and then be really excited about a challenge. If the challenge is delivered, certainly more engaging experience, certainly very interesting way to craft all the complexity they've put into place. Very happy with the game.
Hmm.
And I guess to answer your question directly is their progression schemes, their meta layers are sort of masterfully constructed. You know,
Hmm.
at least as long as you can overcome that initial difficulty. So it's
Hmm.
not a truly everybody game, but I think it does sort of expand the number of audience members that are interested in exploring that degree of complexity.
Hmm. Now, I was looking at the achievement rates on Steam, and it looks like about 55% of the people who bought it did quit, like, before they even, like, did, like, finish the tutorial. Like, there's a lot of
Oh no!
churn with that. Like, the achievement for win a game in the Royal Woodlands biome and on Settler difficulty is at 55.9%. So there is definitely a lot of churn with it. I think a lot of that, again, is that the layers of complexity that we've talked about over almost an hour of this discussion, that there's a lot going on in Against a Storm that we don't really see like that rapidly compared to, again, other city builders. Like with something like with Anno, you're not really seeing like super levels of detail until maybe you've unlocked like the second or third kind of population class. And Against the Storm, they hit you with a lot of it. And I think the tutorial, to be fair, I think it could have been a little bit better. Like they're trying to go for that. It's very hands off, but at the same time, here's like 20 different little tutorial pop-ups saying do this, do this, do this, do this, you have to do
Yeah.
this. And again, like tutorial design in of itself, that's incredibly hard to get right.
I mean, it's better than nothing, but I definitely just clicked all the X's after all those things showed up.
Hmm. And I think the other point, of course, is that city builders are not a, as you were saying, they're not like a mass appealing genre. Like this is not going to be the same thing as a Power World or as a platform or anything that really like you can put in front of people immediately and they're like, okay, that's what makes this game good. This is a game that's like, okay, here's a 4 hour tutorial. Now you get the meta game. Now you play this for another few hours. Now you unlock stuff. And again, it's again like the nightmare of good onboarding and approachability when we talk about roguelike design, because there's also the effect of, oh, and while you're learning this, you're going to lose a lot. you're going to build the city wrong, and then everything just dies on you.
Yeah, with respect to that achievement rate, though, I wonder if it's that people are taking the game slow, or and
Hmm.
I also want. I mean, I'm sort of out of practice in terms of like holding on to relative achievement rate stuff.
Hmm.
I don't know how other games have been doing these days, but yeah, like I used to have a lot of Xbox achievements for games memorized for percentages. Like I used to know Call of Duty's first level completion rate, but I've kind of forgotten that by now. I think that stuff does make a big difference, though. It's like, I mean, or it's very important data, right? To know that only half the people have gone not too far into the game. Sorry, I was looking at the achievements, and now they're just sucking my sucking my my attention up. It is really fun data, right? To know, especially just even if you're just a player and you're comparing yourself against global stats, right? That's enjoyable.
Hmm.
For example, Petrified Necropolis is the achievement I have in Against the Storm that has the lowest completion rate at 12.6. But I do see Fox Utopia win a game with 30 foxes, 15 fox houses, and one tea doctor at 0.7%.
Hmm.
Actually, I have not even unlocked foxes yet. I have not played with any of them.
Me neither. I need to find more time to play all these games.
That's the problem. If you're gonna play everything, a game like some of these games are just impossible at that point, right? Like let's say you wanted to play all games and then like Crusader Kings 5 comes out, right? It's like it can't happen.
Hmm. I still haven't played a Dyson Sphere with the new combat update yet, and that's another 40 to 50 hours right there. So like, try that.
Dyson and these games some like, it's I was having a conversation with a friend about how just awesome like television movie entertainment is these days, and that there's really an unlimited amount of amazing stuff that you can get exposed to, and there's plenty of bad stuff, but some people like some of that bad stuff that you might not like, right? But it's exciting time. uh,
Mm-hmm.
the the amount of enjoyment to be derived from the hard work of the creators is it's good. It's very good.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't have to, oh well, I guess if I didn't have to work, I still would. But I might appreciate a perspective more now that um, if you chose not to and just enjoyed all the shit that's been made.
Hmm. Again, we could just take like a year off and just like play all the games in our backlogs. That would be nice. We have like on-off years. Like we can just like turn everything off for 1 year, play all the games, and then we go back to work for the next year. That would be perfect.
I know we're just about to end on time, but I have something. I had a thought related to this recently. I think that was really sort of important for myself, at least, in that um, it's a reductive statement. There's many different facets to life, but I reduced it to your mind is either entertaining thoughts or it is executing or using a tool, right? If
Hmm.
what I'm doing in my thought process is employing the logics that I've learned, the heuristics that are important to me, the rules to accomplish something, then I'm using rules, and that has a certain kind of there's like a rigor to it and an intense like a work related vibe to it, right? And then entertaining ideas is like imagining what if. That's probably the right way to think if you're trying to design something new. But this dichotomy between entertaining ideas or exploring for the fun of exploring in some ways, because it's the right way to explore, versus take what I know and make things to the best of my ability.
Hmm.
If you get too fixated on either of these, you get out of balance, right? I mean, if you're not having enough fun, then all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And then if you're too much focused on kind of exploration and inspiration, and um, then you sort of get soft on the execution side of things. Some games are great at helping you balance in that way.
Hmm. Yep. And it's again very enjoyable to be able to just kind of figure this stuff out. And but again, like getting someone to that point, like we still need to do an onboarding roundtable. We need to get everyone assembled for that one because there's so much to talk about in terms of how you present this kind of stuff to people that I think it flies over the head of a lot of developers when they're not really thinking about how does it look to learn this game for the next 5, 10, 20, 30 hours. And it's why I think a lot of like someone was saying that I think we're seeing this kind of resurgence of like entry level games becoming really popular. This idea that hey, you don't need to spend 100 hours to play a Power World, or kind of like the appeal of Civilization versus a Crusader Kings, where they're both turn-based strategy games. One is just far more simpler to learn than the other.
One is complex, the other is unreasonable.
There we go. So
Yeah, no, it's true. We'll definitely have to have that talk, and it's probably one that we can have every year,
true.
because it's not like we'll have a great. There will not be a conclusive solution. Mostly, just insights into the reasons why it's hard.
hmm So before we say goodnight, can you think of any other like roguelike or like city builders like Against the Storm or like anything like this that is coming out? Because I was trying to think of like other games people could look at, but my mind is drawing a blank.
Yeah, I sort of feel the same way, but I think then instead of giving you the answer you want, um, I think it's worth sort of recognizing that RTS is suffers from all the same issues. And
Mm-hmm.
so and actually I can't really think of a roguelike RTS necessarily right off the top of my head, but it does make me feel like a similar exercise to building Against the Storm, if
Mm-hmm.
handled by an outstanding RTS development team. I'm thinking of Relic, right off the top of my head, or whoever made Warhammer 40K Dawn of War. Um, that might make me very happy, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we need to have a discussion about real time strategy, so I'm going to start writing my RTS book, or I've started to write, so we need to have that discussion even sooner than later.
For sure, for sure. I have a lot to say about that. I mean, I do remember. I remember the good old days when it was as simple as just saying I was Team Age of Empires instead of Team StarCraft. But it's gotten more complicated.
Oh.
It's always Relic's fault, by the way. I feel like innovations in RTS, at least in the last well, eh, we can have a whole talk about it. It's a real conversation.
All right. So I think with that, we'll wrap things up for this discussion. So for people watching, if you have not played Against the Storm, definitely check it out if you like what you're hearing. Let us know what you think in the comments down below, especially again about points about like Frostpunk and about like the survival style of city building. So, for you, Tomo, do you have anything new to promote? Anything people can find you at? All those lovely link backs and so on.
I mean, I wouldn't call it new. In fact, I'd kind of call it old. But we do have Epic Tavern is on Steam Early Access. It is a game made by Hyperkinetic Studios, the studio that I'm one of the co-founders of. Um, we feel moderately confident that we'll come out of early access by the end of this year. And if you do like complexity and emergent storytelling, there's a lot of that going on in Epic Tavern. Um, and you can find we stream development a couple times a week at twitch.tv/Epic Tavern, and we have a Discord channel at discord.gg/Epic Tavern.
All right, sounds good. And we're going to try and get some more of our roundtables and stuff recorded. Everyone is busy and or sick, so we're trying to get times and health conditions organized. So hopefully we'll be able to do that in the coming weeks. But again,
And
what was that?
GDC is coming up.
Oh, jeez. And I'm sure there's another Next Fest coming in like a month or two, so I can spend half a month playing Next Fest demos. But if we can get these times going, we will be doing more of these. So thank you again for tuning in. If you're new to the YouTubing stuff, like support the channel and get me the opportunity to do more daily streaming. Be sure to donate on Patreon, PayPal, and all that great stuff. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover for a future series, future video, whatever, let us know. But with that said, Tomo, it was great hanging out with you this somewhat reasonably chilly afternoon, at least here on the East Coast, and I'll be looking forward to our next conversation.
Same here, and it's been rainy and chilly
Mm-hmm.
on
All
the
right.
on the West Coast.
All right, everyone, get back to your city buildings and survival, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where you some the art and science of games. And until our next conversation, have a great night.